Hello and welcome to Courageous Leadership Conversations. You might have seen me on my podcast doing other things, but Courageous Leadership Conversations is something I do and I enjoy as part of thinking about my organization, my own company, ATI Coaching, and all the things we do around economic, social, and governance and how we make a difference in the world. And so, Courageous Leadership Conversations is a monthly guest or panel discussion series where we dive into thought provoking topics, sharing diverse perspectives from industry experts and specialists. And the mission here is to inspire courageous leadership that drives change and contributes meaningfully to the world. I always say that leadership is three things, and it's influence, elevated thinking, and excellence in service. And I always want to embody these qualities. And I believe that every organization needs to think about how they are embodying, how their leaders are embodying these qualities. Hence why I'm collaborating with other leaders and people who are changing the world, making a difference, having difficult conversations around organizations, groups, and communities to make a difference. And I think that's so important in our world today. Today's conversation is very, very interesting, and it's going to focus on how to create an inclusive culture in male dominated workplaces. We'll dissect what that means, what's male dominated workplaces. And I'm excited, very, very excited to bring on my guest today, and who is an expert in this area, Dr. Daniel Guinness. Welcome, Daniel.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
I'm really excited having you as a guest today on Courageous Leadership Conversations. And I know that you are definitely a courageous leader because this is not an area that is easy to focus on, is it? So, and we're going to enjoy listening to what you have to say, learning and providing some strategies for organizations. So, I want to tell you a bit about Dr. Daniel Guinness. He's the founder and managing director of Beyond Equality, which has worked with over 100,000 men and boys, helping them disrupt harmful masculinities and find their roles in creating safer, inclusive, and more equitable communities. His company, Beyond Equality, experts in disrupting harmful norms, masculine stereotypes, and helping men and boys build their healthier versions of themselves. He has a PhD in cultural anthropology from Oxford University and published peer review research titled Rethinking Masculinity in the Neoliberal Order. And it's focused on Cameroonian footballers, Fijian rugby players, and Senegalese wrestlers. And he's also a former professional rugby player. So it's nice that he focused his attention in this area. Areas of expertise that he's got include men, masculinity, inclusive leadership, preventing harmful harassment, gender equality, working with boys, and men's mental health. So, welcome, Dan, and thanks for joining us today. I want you to just share and tell us a little bit more about yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me here. I mean, you've given such a generous introduction as well. You maybe can pick up from my accent that I'm originally from Australia,
Wow.
although I've been based across. Well, I first moved to the UK about 15 years ago, which means almost my whole adult life has been
Mm.
in and out working around this part of the world.
I don't know why you've chosen the colder parts of the world than the hotter parts
This
of the
is the
world.
number one comment.
Having said that, the people always end a statement about Australia with saying, a lot of people say this, that in Australia you have things that want to kill you. So
That's so
maybe
true.
always looking
That's
to
true.
kill creepy crawlies. And it's an area of the world that my daughter really doesn't want to go to because she hates creepy. She is totally, totally agoraphobic. She doesn't like spiders at all. So, and
Mm.
she sees the picture, she can't even look at it. She hates it. So nicely that she's got two people, two men in the house. And again, that's obviously that would do that and get rid of any spider in the toilet or in the bathroom. Or so that's good. So yeah, welcome again. And obviously, this topic is your area of specialism, but it's also something that, knowing that in the world today, all the dismantling of the diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives, that a lot of ground has been gained on it and was very useful. Some people were not interpreting it correctly, and some people were using it well to gain advantages in their organizations. But obviously, now what we hear is totally different. It feels like we're going like 10 years backward minimum. And if I have a research here, that from an article by IMD, which says that research is consistently showing that gender inequalities in the workplace significantly impact the company's success by limiting access to diverse perspectives, hindering innovation, reducing employee morale, and potentially leading to lower profits due to factors like unequal pay and limited career advancement opportunities for women. So basically, I think that companies are going to struggle and feel the impact of doing this. And there are those that just know they've gained a lot of ground on it and need to dig their heels in and continue. And so it's us helping them to achieve that. So, in terms of choosing this area of focus for your work, what led you to do that, really?
Yeah. Initially, that was a very personal entry point for me.
Mm,
I was at university. I'd seen like these really disturbing reports come out around the amount of harassment that the women students on our campus were receiving. And I felt that there was some need for me to do something to try to address that. And I started to attend events and started becoming involved with things, but pretty quickly realized that it was myself and maybe a couple of other men who were actually trying to help on this particular issue. And that was obviously like a really big problem because a lot of the a lot of that harassment, if not almost all of it, was coming from men. So we had the
mm,
group of people who needed to be engaged and who were really in those places where they could have an influence and stop the individuals or the groups who were doing that harassment. And that whole group of people wasn't actually part of the solution. And so, yeah, it was from
mm,
that position that we devised like a series of interventions that were actually about bringing men into those spaces, engaging them in those conversations, and helping those men understand that this was a topic that was important for them. This was a place that they could make a contribution.
Hmm. Yeah, I like that the word intervention and the fact that on a personal level, we all have to say when we see something and we
Mm,
hear things. Some people say, "What can I do? I don't have any power, or I don't have any title, I don't have any organization and things." But generally, apart from organizations, we're talking about what can individuals do? How can
mm,
they, on a basic level, I tend to ask myself, I have unconscious bias that causes me to add problems to the world. So, how can I make a difference? And I like the fact that from your university days, seeing that a student still deciding that this is going to influence my career. I had opportunity to be talking to undergraduates in the energy sector this week. And one of the things was I talked to them about the power of why. Many of them couldn't see how they could put together anything to do with a purpose statement around why. And I said, give yourself time, but this is foundational for you to start thinking about why. Why do you do something? And what why drives the organization that you're working with? So I think that's important. And so the next question for you, therefore, is what are some of the key barriers to creating inclusivity in male? I guess backtracking, what's a male dominated space, a male dominated work environment?
I mean, I think this is really like such an important conversation to have, right? Because I would say there's a lot of men who'd be watching this who maybe, it doesn't really feel like I'm in control of the
Yeah,
space that I'm in. I'm pretty much down the bottom of the pecking order. I don't get to to say what happens here.
I think
Um,
my husband would be saying that, but yeah, that's
Right, right. No, and there's a big point there, right? Like, I think, we've got to be really careful with some of our terminology and some of the way we think about workplace dynamics. And,
mm,
taking a perspective here, which is nuanced and intersectional, can
yeah,
really help us pick these sorts of things
mm,
apart. So, like a starting point would be, okay, male dominated. Let's think about places where you have a lot of men in a particular workplace, right? Those are numerous, but they're also quite diverse. It's a very different culture that you're going to get. Well, I can tell you, we work with lots of different places, and sometimes we'll go into a tech space and we're working with, programmers, and there's still typically those teams are very, very heavily numbers wise dominated by men, and also
mm,
often the leadership in those teams, almost regardless of what particular place you're looking at. But the culture that those teams will have will be very different from another space. Like, for
mm,
example, we've done work with men who are working for a council and doing jobs like gardening, looking after the parks, looking after the public facilities, also collecting garbage, these sorts of roles.
mm,
And again, almost entirely men in those workforces
mm,
in that particular place, but a really different culture within the workplace, and also
mm,
different men who are part of those groups, different cultural backgrounds, different interests. And so you'll start to see if we began with, okay, what is a male dominated space?
mm,
But you can start to see that you've got these different types of men and different types of cultures that are there. You might think as well, like a finance boardroom or something like this. This is typically going to have a lot more men around the table than women. And
mm,
again, that's something that's to bear in mind. But you're going to have a very different culture and very different expectations about how people
mm,
should behave. So that's my opening kind of comment on this. Like, how do we understand inclusion in these spaces? Well, first of all, you've got to understand who are the people who are in those spaces.
mm,
And then we've got to be starting to think through, well, what are actually the issues that individuals face on the basis of who they are and their identities?
mm,
And some of those barriers we see there for women, and they persist, right? And this is general things. And these can be things like how safe those women might feel working in those spaces, or traveling to or
yeah,
from those spaces, or working late. You're in an office and everyone leaves except for you and a couple other people. That
mm,
might feel a very different level of safety for a woman than it would be for a man.
yeah,
It might be in terms of how listened someone is. Like, are they given that? You spoke about bias, and sometimes when we're working with groups of people and individuals, you can kind of uncover that they've got these expectations,
mm,
the unexplored prejudices that we might have about what leadership would be, or how a good idea is communicated,
mm,
or what sort of person has the knowledge or doesn't have the knowledge. And some of
mm,
those things are going to be really biased, often towards people who look and sound like us,
yes,
like whoever you are, or who've come through the same institutions as you, who went
mm,
to a similar set of universities or training places,
mm,
speak with a similar style. And then we've been taught that is what knowledge is, that's what authority is. And then that can have a lot of biases and a lot of impact upon people. And
yeah,
again, you read the reports and you listen to what the science behind this is saying, is that a lot of those things do include prejudices, often against women, often against people of color,
mm,
people who are marginalized in other ways, immigrant groups. You
mm,
might also have discussions around accents, and that can be a
yeah,
lot of class that comes into this. If someone has a very posh accent, or if someone seems like that they're treated differently from someone who
yes,
has a different accent,
social
or
class, yeah,
huge, or the
mm,
Scottish people are treated different from the English people. You
yeah,
know, someone gets jokes made about them the whole time and someone else doesn't.
mm,
Like, all of these sorts of things are there.
yeah,
So one of those layers are a barrier that we have to get through,
yeah,
but maybe the most fundamental, absolute fundamental barrier that we have is that people are not aware about other people's experiences.
mm,
So we're oblivious sometimes to some of what our colleagues are going through and the
yeah,
challenges they're facing. And so we're not able to actually address those issues. So the
yes,
barriers are in place because people are choosing to ignore them, or people don't want to do the work to really find them and explore them and surface them. And it can be a bit uncomfortable, right? To say,
yeah,
oh, sorry, like I thought we were all doing great here and this was a wonderful workplace, but I'm hearing now that that's not the case, that you've been struggling, that you've been hitting brick walls every time you try to do something.
mm. I think
But
here,
yeah.
lots of things here to unpick, which I really don't
Mm,
want people to miss. And the key one there, when you first started and talking about it, is the intersectionality of
mm,
different things. When we talk about inclusion, when we talk about diversity, it's multi-layered. And I think those things you have said are very important. It's multi-layered, it has a lot of things in it. And it's all about, when I have done some training to a group of coaches, the title of the training was Coaching Through the Lens of Identities and Intersectionality.
Mm.
And what led me to do that piece of work was someone who ordinarily, being that she's different to me, being white and everything, I would look at her with the bias of whatever challenges you have privilege because you're white. And initially, we were struggling to create a rapport to be able to be client and, client and coach. But
Yeah.
in the middle of the process, we found rapport, and our rapport came from the fact that we're both introverted,
Mm.
and then we're both immigrants. And just
Mm.
because, yeah, and the challenges ran deep in terms of the discrimination. And I could then find common ground, even though our backgrounds are totally different and what we call privilege is different. And during that training, I made the coaches who attended the training, it was in the third sector, understand that culture, that experiences, like you said, the awareness of experiences is so important. And what barrier we put in front of each other is we don't look at the human to human. We don't humanize ourselves when we have conversations. Oh, he's a man, he's white. And we begin to put all those barriers instead of just saying, he's a human being just like me. And starting on that premise allows you to gain awareness and go deep. And you said
Uh,
something very important, which is people don't do this because it is hard work. And I said to the students yesterday, because a lot of training we did with them, I talked to them the first day about stakeholder mapping and stakeholder management plans. And I said, you can get lazy from doing this. And the reason why you have to do it is to understand who is in my circle of influence and who is influencing me, and how can I build the right relationship. And I'm going to
mhm.
tell you now, it takes energy, time, and work. But when you do it right, you build it right. So some of the things you've said here are really important for people to understand as individuals and organizations. And you highlighted three different. Finance is notoriously, especially the banking sector,
Mhm.
notoriously, when I did a speech last year on inclusive environments as well, finance was recorded, I think, by Deloitte or one of those research to come up as one of the areas where women are still struggling to climb up the career ladder, especially, I think, investment banking or something like that. And that's high pressured environments and all of that stuff. So some of the things you've shared are really great. And that brings me to ask you the third question, which is the term toxic masculinity. So we've talked about the challenges, we've talked about the soft stuff, like, let's be real, yes, just because there are so many men around doesn't make it a male dominated environment, because there can be men with the right principles, with the right culture awareness, that can create a nice inclusive environment where, like you said, the woman is the boss, even if she's the one making the tea, and it doesn't diminish their masculinity. But then you have the other side, which is toxic masculinity, and which is something obviously we know in the news. There's a case against Andrew Tate at the moment, and that's a term that I heard as a result of all the case going on about. I started to hear that term a lot. And research done by King's College which was based on they used a representative survey of 3,716 people aged 16 plus, showed that in many cases, in some cases, men were no more supportive of action on gender equality than older men. So younger men were no more supportive. But then we know that we talk about the younger generation, the age of the AI, the age of social liberality. However, young men tend to be more worried about the challenges they are facing. So basically, my question, therefore, is what does it mean for men to claim and own their masculinity, and how could this help or hinder inclusivity in the workplace? So the term toxic masculinity, but how can they own their masculinity, and how will it help with inclusivity in the workplace?
It's a big question you've thrown out
It
there. I
is,
mean, it's a
yes.
fantastic
I know
question,
you
and
have
you
to
you
think a
pulled,
lot.
Yeah, took a bit from here and a bit from there and a bit from here. I I think I want to start by your story with the person that you're working with and trying to find that rapport. And I think here there's like an important lesson about, you want to humanize and you want to recognize that we have different struggles, we have different that we're going through.
Mm,
And quite a few of the terms that are in our space, technical terms, and sometimes when they're said, people hear them in a different way and they're not
mm,
understood. And I
mm,
think privilege is a term like that, where
yeah.
what we often have to do is create space for men in our workshops to actually recognize their own problems, start talking about and thinking, addressing what things they have going on for them,
Mm,
and then recognizing, well, hold on, there's also a whole layer of things they don't have to go through,
mm,
that they're not worried about, that maybe other people do because of their identities. Whether
yeah.
they're, maybe some of the Black men in the room are going through things that other people are not going through. Maybe some people with disabilities are going through things that other people aren't going through, and for a whole range of reasons. And this really is what privilege is about. What don't you have to go through that
Mm,
somebody else is going through? And I think that's like a really useful way for us to be able to actually start to paint this picture where what we're trying to achieve is a workplace where each and every single person can be there, not having to do all this extra cognitive work or emotional work. They're not feeling discriminated against. They're being listened to. The best ideas are getting to the top rather than the ideas that are coming from the mouths of people who sound like us. That's what we're aiming for. And the reality is that to get there, we actually have to recognize, well, what are those privileges that some people have that other people don't? And another way of thinking about that, what is the layers of discrimination or prejudice or bias that is
mm,
in place?
yes.
So I think the work becomes one of both analytically helping people recognize the systemic factors in their workplaces, the structures, the regulations, but also some of those cultural and attitudinal and
Yeah.
relational factors that are at
Mm,
play. Okay. But the work is also holding space for people to process that and to move through discomfort and to be brave enough to do that work.
mm,
And I think this links directly to that survey that you're talking about, where we're talking here about our men's attitudes towards gender equality and how that's differing across different generations.
yes.
And I think, well, what we see, we do a lot of work in workplaces, and I think this is broadly what we're talking about today, but our
Yes.
organization also does a lot of work in schools, where we work with young boys from 12 years old up until 19 years old. And we're taking them through these programs where they're thinking about themselves and their identity. They're thinking about peer pressure and bullying, their friendships. They're thinking about their intimate relationships. They're thinking about their place in society. So broad conversations, but really important conversations for people who are coming of age, who are still trying to find their place in the world. And
Mm,
conversations that, unfortunately, are often not happening for these young people outside of the sort of spaces that we and other organizations might hold.
mm,
If we're not careful, these things might not be in place within family structures. If parents and other family members have to care a lot, have to work a lot, they might not be as available. And we also know that there's often issues that can happen at home. These might not be happening at school. These young people might not be part of community organizations. Like, I do think that as a society, we need to invest more in those community structures so that the pressure isn't on a school teacher and a parent to try to raise the young men by themselves, but actually we build these other structures around where young men are finding those influences from coaches, from community leaders, from faith
mm,
leaders, from thinkers, from social workers, whoever else it might be that we can bring into that picture. So drawing on that experience and that knowledge we have there and bring it to bear on this question about toxic masculinity.
yeah.
So really crucial work here. Saying the term toxic masculinity is describing the aspects of some stereotypical ideas about being a man, or aspects about other people's ideas about what it is to be a man, about their behaviors, about the attitudes towards themselves, about their attitudes towards other people. It's talking about the particular aspects that are harming men and are harming the people around them.
Mm,
So it's not describing all of what it is to be a man. It's only describing one version of that, all the versions of it which are harmful.
mm,
And I think this is a really important distinction here, because I know that there's a misunderstanding of the term, And that misunderstanding says this term is saying all men are toxic.
Yeah.
And it's not. The term is actually saying we should be careful because there are some widespread ideas that influence men or that are about men that are harmful to men and are harmful to the communities they're part of.
Mm.
That do encourage violence, that do encourage social or lead to social isolation and self-harm, that lead to pressure and poor health and not looking after your health,
Mm.
that lead to control and coercion and manipulation.
Mm.
So it's like, well, how can we, and no, I don't think there's not many people in our world who'd be like, oh yeah, it's a very good thing in good faith. It's a very good thing that people have those attitudes that are hurtful to them and hurtful to people around them.
Mm.
Sometimes people hold on to some of those ideas a lot and are scared to let go of them and are scared, not yet courageous enough or haven't been shown a path to actually
Yeah.
find something to replace them and that gives them meaning and gives them purpose and give them a sense of connection. But that's part of the work that our organization does with men,
Yeah.
helping them realize that they can still be a valued member of their family, even if they start to shift some of their attitudes and some of their behaviors.
You've said here disrupting harmful norms and masculine stereotypes and helping men and boys build healthier versions of themselves. And when I think about some of the things that men might go through, because I have a son,
Yeah.
and I'm married, and I
Mhm.
have a daughter. I'm blessed because I can see two different sides of the, standing out as a parent and then as a coach using my tools. And what some of the things you've said here, which is very, very important when we think about things that are happening, we always say, this person is doing this thing to people. But what we don't recognize is what's going on inside them that is causing them to
Mhm.
be this kind of
Mhm.
person. It might come
Mhm.
out, this is my ideology and it's great and it makes me feel great. But underneath the surface, I always say that when you project hate to people, the first person you really hate is you. You
Mhm.
really don't like yourself because, and I use the analogy very simply, that an apple tree cannot suddenly start growing pears. Hate comes from somewhere and is within you. If you love yourself, you are an apple tree, you will produce apples. It might be sour apples, it might be sweet apples, but that in itself is what we call maybe traits. But in terms of at the core of an apple, is an apple seed. It's not a pear seed. So love is a seed, hate is a seed. So that's the way I see it. And you've kind of rightfully said that when it comes to the masculinity that is not right, that is portraying certain things, is because that's going on inside. People are going through, it's always someone who feels socially isolated, who feels like the other gender has not treated them right. There are all sorts of underlying reasons that might point to that. So I guess the second part of the question was, with all these challenges that men do face, and we know men face a lot of challenges. And let's face it, if we look at traditional families, I was speaking to someone who comes from the Arab world, and we were talking about the differences. I don't come from the Arab world, but I brought up in the north. She was talking about the responsibilities, and she said, in their culture, in their faith, men are responsible for looking after the woman, and the woman, when she works, she keeps her money. So she her money is her money, but her husband's money is her money too. So in a sense, that idea we have of women being powerless in a great family dynamic where there's a good man is like the woman has the power, she has more power, because that good man will let her go out to work and earn money and still make sure that he's protecting her and doing everything. And she can only volunteer. And if she doesn't volunteer to help him with the resources, he has to do it. So there's pressure in many societies anyway of, you are the breadwinner, you are the traditional ways of, you are the hunter gatherer, go get it, and all sorts of things. And men want to be loved, want to be appreciated for all those things. So how can a man be a man but still feel they have emotions, they have, how can they claim the right kind of masculinity?
Yeah, it's really interesting. And I think the great thing about what you're doing is you're showing this example of actually how varied our gender roles and relationships can be. And
Mm,
like I would say, at times there's this too simplistic picture that's put forward.
yeah.
So people, like men in charge of every single aspect and everything, and then exerting power, and women are vulnerable and defenseless and, meekly follow along. And there has been a moment in Western feminist history that's managed to disrupt that dynamic. And actually, we've got a different thing happening here. There's a different story about what's happening with gender relations going on in the Arab world and going on in various other traditions, where,
Mm,
there has been that questioning, and it happens in parallel and it happens differently to these Western traditions. I would say, we still need to be mindful there might be different forms of power happening in those places. And
indeed.
sometimes there can be a lack of control over other parts of one's life. And, I think in a lot of places we need to be mindful. I'm certainly not saying this is particular to or even about Arab traditions whatsoever, but I'm
Mm.
saying for
Or
any
African
any
tradition. We
situation.
could look at it in African. I come from Africa. We had certain
Mm,
traditions, and it's about sometimes people make choices and say, "This is how I want to live my life." It doesn't mean that I'm under control or whatever. But generally, what I'm trying to point out at is men sometimes I feel maybe right now might need to know what is really, because even if you don't use the word toxic in a male dominated environment, it might be there's a lot of masculine energy, there's masculinity, and then there's wanting to bring female energy and all of that stuff. How can men really, because I think we all have the same, we sometimes can exhibit male energy, we can exhibit female energy, we can have power, the power dynamics. So what is good masculinity? I guess that's the question that men can feel they aspire to and claim it back for themselves if they are struggling with that sense of identity as a man.
yeah, I think the core of the answer here is recognizing a couple of things. Like the first one is that it might not be as simple, just you make a decision and you get to change and everything works out perfect.
Yeah,
You're pointing out that we live in a society or we work in a workplace, and sometimes, if I just change how I talk or behave, maybe the people around me are going to make jokes, and maybe things could get difficult for me.
yeah.
So you got to understand this is a process. I think the key for changing those spaces is actually to open up some of the conversations amongst those groups of men, give them a chance to actually feel safe and to be a little bit vulnerable and to share a little bit about what they're going through. And my experience, literally doing this hundreds, if not thousands of times, is that pretty much everywhere there's going to be a series of stories where men are going to start talking about, like, yes, I feel the pressure to provide.
Mm,
I feel the pressure to be the provider. Um, you might have some men then say, I'm struggling with that because I can't find anyone to provide for, and I don't know
mm,
what my purpose is, or I
mm,
can't find a job. I'm really struggling paycheck to paycheck. And
mm,
maybe I'm by myself, or maybe my wife is flourishing, and that itself is really challenging. I don't know what I
yeah.
can do here. And you'll have some people saying, I'm going through health difficulties. I don't want to share this with anyone because I don't want to burden them. So I'm sneaking off to go to my cancer treatments because I don't want to tell my family. I don't want to tell my friends about it because I just don't want them to have to go through this. It's my problem.
Mm,
And when you start to get some of this stuff coming to the surface, and then you're having other men that they know listen to them and acknowledge that and being like, that sounds really difficult, and be like, thank you for sharing that. We
mm,
appreciated hearing that. It actually breaks through some of these barriers and the stigma that was there, where men get a chance to share a little bit about themselves for the first time. Men get a chance to show some care towards other men.
mm,
And I think that is a really powerful starting point.
mm,
And from that starting point of actually being able to receive care, being able to ask for help, and being able to show care towards other people, a lot can be built.
mm,
From there, you're able to say, okay, can we also extend that to the women that we're working with? And can we do this work of Like, let's be vulnerable and think about, are there anything that we're doing that's actually making this a really unsafe or intolerable place for them?
Mm,
That can then start a conversation, which is brave enough to listen and self-assured enough to be able to handle the information and be able to actually adapt and
mm,
change. But I really think you hit the nail on the head, right? Where the the work that's needed here is one where you're making people feel assured of themselves and to know who they are, even
mm,
as they change and even as they're part of a changing society.
mm,
Because what we're seeing, the voices at the moment who are really cutting through and appealing to a lot of these insecure or troubled or young men who are actually dealing with a lot of problems, the voices that reach them are ones which radicalize them a little bit
yeah,
towards misogyny. And that
yeah,
the reason why is they say, hey, I've got a solution for you. I know your place in the world. Your place in the world is with me on top above women. And it's one of dominance and control and aggression. Go take
mm,
what's yours. And I think we
mm,
can come in with another one that says, I know your place in the world as well. It's with us. It's together at the top. And it has all these advantages of healthier relationships, more fulfillment, exploring these other parts of yourself. It's a
mm,
really exciting thing where you get to be, you can be a father who's caring as well as who's providing some structures. You
mm.
can,
Who is a strong CEO as well? You know,
who can listen to, and a strong
yeah,
CEO who's able to have
who
people
can
from
show
all
their
backgrounds.
emotions, who can be vulnerable. Yeah,
Yeah, these things are there for you. There's got to be a calling in. It's got to be like, join us.
yeah,
You're part of this. This is a really meaningful identity and place that you can play in the world, and you're
mm.
welcome to come play it. Like, join.
I like the focus on how you can, because I think everybody is empowered by knowing that they can make a difference and they can have impact. But is what
Mm,
type of difference? And to be feeling empowered to make a difference, you have to first of all address your own vulnerabilities and find a safe space to do that. And so I like it. And one of the things you said that my previous, I did a courageous leadership session for last month, and it focused on generally the topic of suicide prevention, courageous leadership in suicide prevention. And yes, the statistics still show that young men more or less suicide happens higher, but you use
mhm,
the same word. You said acknowledging that it's difficult, and she said just people being able to talk and being told, and someone acknowledging, yes, what you're going through is difficult, is just brings light into darkness that a man might be going through, and just needing to understand that understanding all human beings need it. But she was saying for men who want to feel macho and everything, having that space. So you've said the same thing, which I like. And I guess whether it's toxic or not, I mean, glaringly toxic or just men not knowing how to handle the power dynamics in the workplace, we know that at the end of the day, for whatever reason, our society has led to organizations creating barriers for women. So I want to go to another question, but then again, kind of anchor it on research. So the National Library of Medicine wrote an article about the differences in the challenges for women and opportunities. And it said human resource policies surrounding promotions and opportunities for advancement are another area of concern in organizations with more formal job ladders that are used to dictate and constrain workers' promotion opportunities. Women are less likely to advance in those areas. And it says that this occurs because job ladders tend to be divided by gender, which is interesting, isn't it?
mm,
And as such, gender job segregation that is seen at the entry positions will be strengthened as employees move up their specific ladder with no opportunity to cross into other lines of advancement. Thus, women will lack particular job experiences that are not available within their specific job ladders, making them unqualified for advancement. So, I guess my question is how can organizations ensure that their inclusivity efforts address the diverse experiences of women such as maybe ethnic minorities, you have introverted women, or those from underrepresented groups, and amplify their voices so they feel seen and heard. So now I'm asking you to flip to the other side and give organizations, what should men who are in authority do? Because the system is built in. This is what this research from the National Library of Medicine is saying. Is built in, the bias is already built in the way the job ladder has been set up. When I read this research, it dives deep into how HR, which then is supposed to help dismantle this, but because of the policies around promotion and advancement that have been built into the system, facilitate the lack of advancement for women. So how can organizations then ensure inclusivity and address this?
Mm. I mean, I think a really important starting point is to recognize, okay, what of those criteria for jobs is actually necessary and which one's
Mm,
necessary. And that's often where people have got tripped up. And then the second point on that is, how do we find and look for evidence that someone could actually meet that criteria and do that job?
mm,
Um, and like listen, you can think about this in terms of a diversification of whatever the upper levels of an organization, and that's important. But
mm,
you can also just think about it from the perspective of, like, you want your best talent at the top. And if you're setting up these different pathways and some of those ladders aren't working, and
mm,
some of those ladders just mean anyone who enters into that ladder is not going to get to the top, like it just doesn't work, you've got a problem. And you want to be finding a way that you can bridge that ladder, and bring that group across in some way. And
mm,
that might be things like, training programs to pick up on the particular skill set or experience that people who are in that type of work don't have. So you're essentially recognizing, oh, hold on a second, this ladder's broken at the third rung. Let's add something so that people can start getting across, and let's help fill that gap. And I
mm,
know, I mean, an example of this is doing work with another organization, and their specialism is they recognized, and I've got to get the details right here, but they recognized that within the design and the fashion industries, that that essentially there's a real absence of people of color entering into those positions.
mm,
Um, and the problem was that they were missing a couple of parts of the knowledge about the sector itself that meant they weren't
mm,
getting through those interview rounds.
mm,
And so this organization is set up with essentially like a very quick coaching course that provides those people who are very talented, who've got experience in neighboring sectors that should be brought across, but are just missing a little bit of contextual knowledge. And it
mm,
trains them up with that specific thing that they're missing, and then allows them to enter in and actually provide all their skill sets in this new context. So, I
mm,
mean, that's an organization that's been set up to do that. And many of the companies in this sector are actually turning to this organization saying, yes, please help us make the most of this wonderful talent source sitting in other parts of other sectors neighboring to us, or actually aren't finding their pathway into our sector because of a barrier that doesn't really need to be there. So I would say that, if you can think about that as an analogy, or that as a particular example or a model to follow, that you go a long way.
yeah.
And if we flip it over here, now you asked about specific people who are facing specific forms of marginalization, right?
Yes.
And we can also apply the same sort of thinking to our organizations to think about that, right? If you have someone, the first question is going to be, well, what is the experience of someone who's from that background in our organization?
Yeah.
What actually are they going through? Can we talk to some people to listen, to understand this a bit more? Can we talk to external advisors who can help us understand that some more? And that's going to start to give you a picture of, well, people are needing to do extra work every day just to have their ideas accepted and listened to, or even just to access the workplace. In some
Mm,
case, right, they might need to actually go through a whole setup of, like, what are they bringing in from home to allow them to be in the workplace? I'm thinking of someone who might have a disability, for example,
yes.
all those additional layers that are going on there for them, right? Okay. Then your question is, are any of those barriers stopping someone from moving up the ladder, stopping them from getting that experience? You mentioned someone who's an introvert, and it
Mm,
might be that your company, a lot of companies require for people to be leading that they need to be, I don't know, speaking out loud in a big public meeting, even though the management position might not require those skills, or
Mm,
the higher up position might be rather analytical in decision making.
mm,
So why do you only look for the value in the people who shine in that particular way?
yeah.
And could you be building a new ladder that was actually designed to pick up the people who had the skill sets that you really actually need to do the work, and who are coming from a whole range of different perspectives and backgrounds?
So many points there. You saw that I was writing, which is brilliant because there is this quote that says you have to be careful climbing up the ladder of success. And when you get to the top, you realize that your ladder has been leaning against the wrong wall all the time. And this is
Mm, 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 mm,
perhaps
mm, mm,
happens in organizations that they have put the wall on a ladder, which is all these policies and things, and climbed up to the top. And now, with the lack of diversity, they can now see that looking through the organization, there are challenges with success and challenges with, I had the opportunity recently to work with a government organization that wanted to work on their program
mm,
for diverse Black and ethnic minorities. And I was brought in to
mhm,
talk about personal branding, personal effectiveness, and presence. And I thought this
mm,
is really important. The key element of it as well is helping the Black person to say, how do I create presence and how do I build a personal brand? Not just my color, but how do I also step up in those, and how do I face the barriers? And I think it was important to kind of like look at it in the context of, is the organization one great? The organization is saying we want to help these people. And you said something very critical there, which is within the career ladder, what are the knowledge gaps that create barriers? So that because people don't have that, they will never get there. What are the
mm,
skill set gaps that people, because they don't have that, and we're not looking at that because we have this bias or this opportunity that then promotes certain people, and certain people are able to close those gaps. So we're not recognizing that that particular gap is the reason why other people are not getting the opportunity, and it takes the
yeah.
work to be done. And something, I was a member of a chamber, and I went for a Women's Day event. I remember it very well. And the leader of the chamber, a woman at the time, was asked about gender equality work. And she said her principle. So she talked about the fact that she rose from low to get up to the level she's at. She's won an OBE and everything. And she then said that as her principle is that the best person gets the job. And I was upset. I was like, the best person gets the job just always provides opportunity for the louder person on the surface, maybe a man more than a woman, all those things. But guess what? Before she left, most of the key positions were occupied by women. And so the person, her successor, man, is now surrounded by lots of women. And the way the organization moved during that period was great. The women were very engaging. They brought in a lot of, like the way they marketed and the way they put put activities together got a lot of membership into the chamber. So I guess in effect, maybe she had a I will find time to actually speak to her at some point because I want to know. Yes, moving from that process of the best person gets the job, which people say as an excuse to not do anything about the knowledge gap, the skill set gap, or the gender issues. That's the way I saw it then. But then coming up with women having a lot of opportunities before she left, how did she move from there and help women to be the best person for the job? You see what I'm saying? To be the best. So those are some being the best person for the job, getting. So my next question really is maybe sharing with the work that you've done, helping leaders, any case study that you might have, helping leaders to see the possibilities with creating the right culture in an environment where we can claim male dominated. And male dominance here, we've kind of explained that it's more about the energies and things, not just the numbers, because a woman can be thriving where there are so many men. but it's about what energy is being brought there, what attitudes, what behaviors. So, is there any case study, any story maybe of a transformation that you could share that will help people actually conceptualize or visualize the results that can come out of this?
Yeah, I mean, there's one particular organization that we've been working with for, I think, probably 6, 7 years now. And, in different ways.
Mm,
I often coming in to engage, bring in new ideas and new perspectives. And then also as part of essentially like a whole of organization rollout of a training program. The opportunity that came out of that training program, it focused on allyship, which the definition that we have of allyship is a starting point, right? Because it's inherently just intrinsically understandable to people is you use your influence to remove other people's barriers to inclusion. And it just says, hey, let's just make sure that your colleagues next to you or your team members are not facing barriers to
mm,
being able to work fully in this organization and be supported to be in this organization. And where we do see them, let's work out what can we do to actually address those. And you as an individual, okay, you might be down the bottom of the organization, but you could still potentially play a role either in supporting somebody, listening to them, talking through, or by talking to your manager or someone like this who might be able to have a bit more influence, or maybe by learning yourself and changing how you behave in some ways. And what came out of that conversation, out of that training, was not one universal change where all of a sudden every single team changed how they did their meetings, or every single team, did things differently in a particular way. Instead, what we saw was a whole range of very contextual and unique conversations, team by team, place by place, country by country. It identified that in some places, the barriers might have been some biases that were showing up in meetings and who was listened to or not listened to. In other places, the problem was that there had been no space given around, when some external events had happened in broader society that had been
mm,
really traumatic, and there hadn't been the space to actually process that. So people who were affected by it were turning up to work traumatized by what was happening. And we're talking here some conflict situations as well.
yeah.
And in other places, the issues were ones where leadership were just not listening to people.
Mm,
In other places, it was issues being caused around very restrictive ideas about how people should be looking and sounding at work. It wasn't really it wasn't necessary, and it
mm,
wasn't representative of the people who actually worked in that workplace. So
mm,
this is all within the same organization, but you sort of started to see these different issues coming to the fore in different places and being able to get dealt with at that level as well, even as culturally what was being embedded was this idea of, and this practice of, we actually care about you being able to do your work here and do your work to the
yeah.
best ability, and you being a human who's coming to do that. And
Yeah.
we're going to be looking for those opportunities to further support you. And actually, yes, we benefit as an organization, but at the core of it, we want to make sure that you're benefiting as an individual. That's how the work is
Mm,
done.
I like this definition of allyship, which is use your influence to remove other people's barriers to inclusion. And
Mm.
that is huge. That is huge. It's like you also then created a picture of the person sitting next to me. What is their barrier that is stopping them from being included? It's as simple as going to a meeting and going when you know that you have a quieter colleague that can't get a word in. If you are somebody who gets your word in all the time, it can be as simple as going, I think patience has something to say here. And I thought it's important that we get everybody's viewpoint and just
Mhm.
keep quiet because you know that you
It's
can always get your turn very quickly. It just puts the onus on people to be thinking every day that they go to work, how can I do the best work and have everybody around me feel happy at work, which increases my own happiness as well. Because whether you like it or not, if the person next to you is not happy, the mood in the room, the energy that is brought to the whole processes of work will be low. So even if you are great at your job, if somebody is going through turmoil with their job and there is a transference in terms of different stages of work, what you're going to be getting to do yours, you'll do more, or you might get something that is full of errors because of the challenges, and you will have to, and it will be impacted somehow if we think about it that way. And I like what you've said about it shouldn't just be organizational. Departments should look at how they can make a difference. Teams should look at their own strategies. And I talked about this a lot. It went down well when I did a talk last year in Dublin at a conference for IT. You know, IT traditionally is a very can be a very male dominated environment, but women are breaking in a lot more. And I talked about the fact that team dynamics is about creating your own team ecosystem, having an ecosystem almost like a greenhouse, and saying, how do I make sure that even if things are going on around, what I really want this plant or this team to look like? And as a team
Mhm.
leader, because I was speaking to managers at that level, and I was saying, how do I stop cross pollination of the bad things by creating my own greenhouse, kind of thing. And I think you really hit the nail on the head with that. We could go on with this conversation for ages, but I think we really touched on some key things here and looked a lot about so many things. So, are there three short, sharp, actionable steps that you can share that people, whether they're employees, managers, executives, wherever you want to place those uh, three key action points that people can take away to make their workplaces more inclusive? What are some three key things that they can start or that they can continue doing?
Yeah. I think one thing is, regardless of who you are, bring in that allyship framework idea and think about,
Yeah,
well, what are the experiences of people around me? Are there some ways that I can help them, right?
yeah.
Understand the people around you, their experience. How can you help them? That's one thing. The second thing I would say to men, because this is my speciality, I
Mm,
think men in leadership, see if you can actually get yourself the time and the space to do that personal work, to understand how you've been shaped by ideas of what men should be or how they should behave and what success is. And if you can understand yourself, you're also going to be in a much better position to understand the culture that is in your organization,
mm,
and then start to actually both be a more inclusive leader, but also to challenge any aspects of that culture which are harmful.
mm,
And the last one, which is, I think, to absolutely everyone, and it's about engaging men and boys in this topic. And it's just to say, really approach, if we're thinking about, hey, hold on, there's someone in my life or a part of who's maybe got some attitudes which are not great, which are harming them, hurting them, harming others, want to step in, is to do that in a way that's like positive and compassionate towards that person,
mm,
and to recognize, as you said, patience, there could be that layer underneath, which is a lot of pain and insecurity and suffering.
mm,
So if you can actually reach out to that person and treat them with respect and curiosity, even as you are trying to change some of the ways they behave,
mm.
that's good tactical advice, I think, for make that conversation more productive and also easier.
These are great action points. If I could just summarize allyship, the idea of allyship, explore that for organizations and the different levels. Then think about personal responsibility and personal change that you can make from within. They always say, looking in the mirror first. So look in the mirror first to see your own image. There's a saying, and it's a faith saying, take the log out of your own eye so you can see the speck in another person's eye. And that is really a big one that you've said with the number two. And the third one is reaching out to other men with empathy, with curiosity, and with respect. And so,
Mhm.
if men can form that ability to do that, I think those are really brilliant tips. So, thank you so much for being a guest today. Like I said, this topic is so wide, we could keep talking about it, and we spent a lot of time looking at the different elements of it. In terms of getting in touch with you, if people want to get in touch with you, is LinkedIn the best place to connect with you?
Yeah, via LinkedIn, where
Yeah.
I'm Dan Guinness on LinkedIn, or you can go to our website, which is www.beyondequality.org. and find out about the programs that we can run with organizations and schools and workplaces and many
Mm.
other different places.
Brilliant. So thank you again for being our guest, Dr. Daniel Guinness. And we really, I've really gained a lot having this conversation. And just to say, with regards to allyship, in the earlier parts of my career is where I formed this, which is at least 30 years ago, where I formed this idea that it's not always, the problem is not always what you think. Because when I struggled to get opportunity to look after my young family, I had so many barriers. They were fixing the motorway and doing a lot of work on the motorway. So I was getting home late. My child was the last in the nursery to be picked up. I'll be crying all the way back home because I didn't like it. I didn't like my child being the
Mm,
last. My husband was working away from home. I asked and I begged and I said, I want to go part time. And I was refused. And there were two women. Our department was women dominated. So this is a different thing I experienced, was women dominated, and there was so much fight between the women at the top. So one got sacked and our boss got sacked because the CFO and our boss were at loggerheads. So our boss got sacked, and then the CFO brought in a man. She didn't know what she did for us. Now, most people hated this man, but I loved him because he came in and the first thing he did was say, I can't hear you guys bickering, and put you in a team and have a conversation. So each person come into the room and I'll get what I need. And I thought, how clever are you? You know women. And each person came in and he said, there's confidentiality, is a safe space, talk to me. And I just told him, I can't focus at work because I know my kids, my life is hard at home and I'm alone. I'm married, but I'm operating almost like a single parent. Both of us are trying to build a career and we need the money. We have to put a roof over our head and everything. And all I've asked is that I can do part time. He said, it's a no brainer for me. I mean, you're not at work doing great. You don't have a great home life. Where is it? So, where are you the best person? Are you the best person at work? No. Are you the best mom? No. But if we give you what you're asking and meet you halfway, you will give us the best person, best of yourself at work, knowing that you
mm,
can be the mom. I don't see why this was not easy for women to get, women like yourself. And that was an interesting insight. So I like to always bring to the conversation that balance of insights for people to see. He signed it the next day. I got my part time. But the women then never really changed because when it came to promotion, they said, oh, because you're part time, you can't get promoted.
mm,
And at that time, he was on his way out as well because he came only to fix problems. So
mhm,
I just want to say that if you're a man out there, allyship means doing things like what this man did, to help us balance out the challenges people were facing. And also, if you're a woman, think about how allyship with the man can make all the difference in the world. And just to leave with a final quote, like I always do in all my shows, it says, gender equality is not about women, and it is not about men. It is about making workplaces work for everyone. Together we fix work, not women, by Michelle King. And she's an executive with Netflix. I guess maybe that's why Netflix has a lot of women directors who who produce films for them,
mm.
just as men do, which is an interesting thing. So thank you again, Dr. Daniel Guinness, and uh, especially doing this on your birthday. I want to say to everybody, happy birthday. Happy
Thank
birthday
you
to
very
you.
much.
Wonderful day. Check in the comments for Dr. Daniel's details because I'll be putting them in there. And also in March, on March 15th at 12 p.m. GMT, I will be repeating my Becoming a Woman of Influence masterclass on Roundtable. So, how can we support ourselves as women to remove barriers, scale hurdles, and step up to lead with courage? So, if you're in a space where you want to do that, come and join me. It's free, and we'll have a masterclass, and I'll give you some strategies and tools. So, take care. Thank you for joining us. God bless. Bye.